In this episode of Shannon Ayers Speaks, I have the honor and privilege to interview none other than Miss Jane Elliott. Miss Jane Elliott has spent the last 52 years of her life educating us on racism and inequalities. Hello Beautiful presents
HOPE is an acronym for Holding On to Positive Energy.
So first of all, I want to thank you so very much for agreeing to do this interview with me. I so appreciate it.
You don't understand. I need to thank you for allowing me to spread this message.
Oh, wow. Well, there's a reason why I'm reaching out to you. The message you're spreading is a good message. I've been following you for quite some time, and we definitely appreciate all of the contributions you've made to our community in really not just educating white people, but educating all of us on what we need to know.
Once again, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You need to realize if it hadn't been for Black people, there would be no people like me.
Wow.
You are my 30th to 50th cousin, and we've got to get it into people's heads that you and I are members of the same race.
Yes, ma'am.
We just have different skin color, but inside we're practically the same because we are all members of the human race. We've got to get over the idea of 3 or 4 different races. You and I are 30th to 50th cousins. Now, you might not want me for a cousin, but you have no choice. That's what I am. Get used to it. And let's not talk about different races. And do you know any people who are biracial?
Actually, no. Interestingly enough,
No, you don't.
I've been having that conversation really since I was about 15 or 16 years old when there was a topic on Ricky Lake talking about biracial and all of this other craziness. So we're in good company.
Good. But we're in a very limited group.
Yes, that I do.
The people who believe there's only one race. That's a very small number. But we're going to increase the numbers by conversations like this one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get started. And so I just have a series of questions and we're just going to dialogue and have a good time. Since we're family already, then it should be nice.
Yes, we are. We're members of the family of man. And we have to remember that.
Yes, ma'am. So, okay, so my first question, this first segment is called Getting to Know Jane. So I would like to know, I would like for you to tell me about Lloyd and Margaret Jennison growing up in Riceville, Iowa.
We grew up on a hardscrabble farm 4.5 miles from town. We went to a country school, a rural school, on the northwest corner of my father's farm, which that acre had been contributed to the school district by my great-grandfather. My father went to the same school that I did, the same one-room country school. So did my aunts. So did my brothers and sisters and I, until we were in 8th grade. And then we went into town to school. It was a and we were dirt poor. I mean, we were as poor as you can possibly be. We didn't get electricity till I was 10 years old. We never did get running water on that place until we all left home. So I know how it feels to be without the absolute, what people today call the necessities of life. We didn't have electricity until I was 10. We literally read by the light of a kerosene lamp.
Wow.
I know how it feels to be poor. And I'm not rich, but I'm better off than I was when I was from the age of birth to 18. I'm better off now than I was then. But I was in really good place then because my father was a believing Baptist and my mother was a casual Catholic. So we weren't allowed to talk about church much. And when we did, my dad would say, if you think you're better than they are, prove it. And that's it. And he'd say, you don't judge a book by its cover. And he'd say, a man's judged by the company he keeps. The best of company's none too good, by God. And he said, I don't have to go to church to pray. I can pray out in the field behind those horses. And I think he did, because with 7 kids and no money, I think he prayed a lot. But he also taught us, get an education. what you put in your head, they can't take away from you. Get an education. And he also said to us, make up your mind whether you're going to make $1 or make a difference, and then do it. So my brothers one became a dairy plant operator. The other two became civil engineers. My two sisters and I became teachers. My brothers made $1. My sisters and I made a difference.
That's definitely a good way to put it.
Oh yeah, that's what we did. And my mother said, get married and live with a farmer just like I have. And I looked around and thought, do I want this? So I went to college, and I paid my own college education. I wanted to be a nurse, and my dad said, if you'll go into education, I'll help you. If you go into nursing, I won't. And I thought, well, you can't help me either way. But what my dad wanted me to do, I did, because he was the most moral man I have ever met in my life. He was totally moral. He would say, if you're going to lie, don't lie to me. And he never told a lie. I never caught him in a lie because he wouldn't do it. He absolutely would not do it. My mother was kind of casual about truth. It kind of came and went, but not my dad. My dad was extremely loyal and faithful and determined and good father. He was a good father. I was lucky.
Would you say that was your biggest influence?
Absolutely. That's my biggest influence to this day. And when people say to me, how could you do that to those poor little children with the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise? I remember what my dad said when he saw the first film that was made in my classroom of that exercise. I took it up. It was made by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I took it up to the hotel that my husband and I owned, and they were living in, and I showed it to my mother and father. And when it was over, he stood up, with tears in his eyes. He took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls, and he said, wiped his eyes, blew his nose, and said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
If somebody had taught him that when he was 9 years old, he could have had all the 50 years that he wouldn't have had to suffer under having to be a racist when he didn't believe in it. He had to match the community, and it was difficult. But if I had taught him that, if somebody had taught him that when he was 9 years old, that would have been 50 years that he didn't have to feel guilty about the things he was going along with.
Wow. I can only imagine how difficult that was for him during that era.
Oh, it was difficult for him to have a daughter that was called the town's only N-word lover. That was difficult. And I'd go up to school, up to his house after teaching a day and having these horrible things happen to me and be said about me, and it was ugly. And he'd say, smile a lot, and they'll wonder what you've been up to. So I'd smile a lot, and they wondered what I was up to because I kept smiling and singing and walking through the halls and doing my job, and they had to wonder, why isn't she scared? Why isn't she sad? Why doesn't she know how much we hate her? I knew how much they hated me, but it didn't matter. I refused to be defined by somebody else. And that's what children of color and children of all colors, white and all those other colors, have to realize. You must not allow somebody else to define you. You know what you are. You know how good you are. You know how smart you are. You know how worthwhile you are. You know how good the people who raised you are. And you must not let some ignorant racist define you.
Absolutely. And that actually brings me to my next question in asking, who is Jane Jennison, the young lady that was growing up with that father?
Well, I was the middle kid.
Mm-hmm.
I was the middle in a family of 7. And I was the only one who looked, until my younger brother came a year after I was one, I was the one who was born looking like my father's family. All the rest of them, except my brother and me, my younger brother and me, they all looked like my mother's side of the house.
So you were born to stand out.
What? Yeah, I knew what it felt like to be the left out one, the strange one. I was the strange one all my life. And my mother, when I was from the time I was born until one day, I suppose I was 10 or 11, when she started to tell the story about somebody who'd say, you've got 3 girls and only 1 boy. When I was born, she had first Charlie, and then Mary and Jean and Jane, and then Jim. Well, she wanted all those people to be male, because she thought they could be priests. And she wanted to have a boy when I was born. And she would tell that story, oh my God, endlessly. Yes, when she was born, I wanted a boy. And I just said, give her to Lloyd, let him name her. I haven't thought of any girls' names. So my dad named me, and he named me Mabel after his sister, whom my mother hated. And my older brother named me Jane. Yeah, my older brother named me Jane after the Jane in the Dick and Jane in the Scott Forsman reading series. So I go through life being called Jane because my mother won't say Mabel. And
Wow.
people and young men invariably would say to me,
So your real name is
young men would say to me Tarzan, you Jane. And I'd say, go swing on a vine and leave me alone. I don't appreciate that. But you see, that was in the days of Tarzan and Jane, and so that's what I got stuck with. It was a most interesting childhood. I know how it feels to be left out. She didn't like me at all. She had a hard time with me. In fact, I can remember when I was about 3 years old, my aunt and uncle, my aunt Mabel and her husband came up, and my folks had 5 children at that time. And Mabel, my aunt, after whom I was named, said, Dee, we want to take one of your kids. You've got 5 kids, and you can't raise all these children. We want to take one of your kids. We'll adopt them. And my mother said, well, which one do you want? And she said, we want Jean. And I can remember my mother saying, you can't have Jean, but you can take Jane. You can take Jane if you want to. I heard that when I was 3 years old. And they said, we don't want Jane, we want Jean. Because Jean was blonde-haired and blue-eyed and brilliant. And Jane was a scruffy, dark-haired, mouthy little brat. Jean was an angel, and I was the devil. They had the two of us right there together. And so I knew for a long time. Finally, when I was 10 or 11, when that story would start being told, I'd leave the house. I didn't have to hear it anymore. But that's one thing about what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We are showing over and over and over.
But it makes me wonder, though.
I'm sorry.
With you growing up and having that experience, what did that do to your self-esteem and how you felt about yourself?
I just figured she was wrong. I just figured, yeah, they're smarter than I am. They're prettier than I am. They're everything that I'm not. But on the other hand, that's their problem. They'll have to deal with it. Wow.
Very wise for someone so young.
Well, my dad would say, you don't know what you're worth. Get out there and make something of yourself. Go to school and get an education. They can't take away from you what you got in your head. He never put me down. He didn't put down any of us, but he never put me down. But interestingly enough, he was fond of spare the rod and spoil the child. Mm-hmm. So when we did something wrong, he would go out to the lilac bush out on the north corner of the house, and he'd cut a switch about this long, a little longer, and he'd bring it in, and he'd line us all up, 5 kids all lined up, and he'd whip our legs with that switch. And he'd start with Charlie, Mary, Jean, and by the time he got to me, I was screwing my head off. So he only hit me maybe twice. Then Jim, because Jim wasn't going to cry. Yeah, going to make me.
So you were very smart.
Dummy, cry. For God's sake, be smart about this. Cry, and he'll leave you alone. And the kids said, you never get it as bad as we do. And I'd say, you never cry as loud as I do. You know, if you know what's coming, you do what you can to protect yourself from it. And that's what black kids and the kids who are with them in the major cities in the United States today know what's coming, so they're going to protect themselves from it.
Wow.
They know what they have to do to keep this from happening to them. Go on, what's your next question?
Well, that kind of explains your resilience. It definitely explains how you are today and with everything that you've accomplished thus far. I want to kind of fast forward just a little bit. You were married for, almost 59 years? Can you tell me about Mr. Daryl Elliott and how he rocked your boat?
I'll turn into a soup sandwich.
That's what we want. We want the mushy stuff.
What?
We want the mushy stuff.
Well, this isn't mushy. It was flat out. First it was love, and then it was sex, and then it was sexy love, and then it was loving sex. It was, when I met him, he looked exactly like Marlon Brando. I mean, exactly. And I thought, and I had sworn from the day I would think about those things that I was going to marry a brown-eyed man. And his best friend, his best friend girlfriend, introduced us because his best friend's girlfriend wanted to date Daryl, but she figured she'd have to introduce him to somebody that he wouldn't want to have around. So she introduced him to me, and I thought, oh, Marianne, you made such a mistake. You are never going to get your hands on this one. He was just gorgeous. Oh my God, he was gorgeous. And big brown eyes, and a grin that would melt. It would melt a statue's heart. He was just absolutely lovely. And there was no way I was going to let him get away. And so after we'd been dating for a year and a half, we went to the minister's study in Boone, Iowa, with his friend, another friend of his, and his girlfriend, and got married one Saturday afternoon because he was tight as a he was tight. He was of Scottish background, so he wouldn't spend a dime. He would squeeze a buffalo nickel until it cried for mercy. It was something interesting. So I paid for the wedding marriage license because he couldn't afford it, and his dad went with him to the courthouse to get the license because Daryl wasn't 21 yet. At that time, you had to be 21 in order to get married. So we took this license to the minister, and he married us, and that was the beginning of ups and downs and poverty and good times and fun and laughter and sorrow and joy, and we had it all. We had it all. Wow. 4 kids in 5 years. Then we found out what was causing that, but it takes a while to find out. After we found out, we didn't keep on having children, but we did keep on having that. And so it was I think they just do not give up until you absolutely have to.
That's a good way to keep hope alive.
What?
That's a good way to keep hope alive.
Well, yeah, and you see, for me, hope is an acronym for holding on to positive energy. And when I was married to him, I held on to positive energy. And now I have a sign on my wall in California that says, "Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened."
Oh.
Yeah. So I look at that thing on the wall, and I think, okay, I'm going to smile about this.
Wow.
And it's really hard. Anyway, what's your next question?
Well, my next question is, what do you think was the most significant factor of the longevity of your relationship?
Neither of us would give up. We were both as stubborn as could be. Even no matter how mean we got, we didn't get mean to one another. We never got mean to one another. We'd get angry, but there was never a thought of breaking that situation up because we both absolutely, each of us adored the other. Adored him to the point where, well, it was, we went, I can't do that. We went on a vacation to Hawaii for 2 weeks one time because he worked for a national tea food store or another food store. And they gave the managers of the chain, each of the managers, they could take this trip. They took a trip as a company group every year. We went to Hawaii one time, and I was walking out along on the beach, and he was someplace else. And these young women kids kept running by me. And I said, I finally stopped and I said, "What's going on? Where's everybody going?" She said, he's here. I said, "Who's here?" "Marlon Brando, he's down on the beach and he's signing autographs." I thought, would he do that? So I ran down the beach, and there's my husband in the middle of this gaggle of girls signing autographs. Marlon Brando. I said, "Daryl, you can't do that. That's against the law." He said, "Shut up, Jane, they're paying me." Marlon Brando. And he couldn't spell for it, and his writing was terrible, so they didn't know what they were getting. So I said, "I'm sorry, folks, but Mr. Brando has to go back to the hotel now. He has an appointment." And I took him back to his appointment, and he thought I had to do something with an award from the Mental Health Association in Washington, D.C. several years ago. So my sister and I and Daryl went into Washington, D.C. It was in the winter time, and he got into the cabin. He had his collar pulled up around his collar raised on his top coat. And we got into the cabin. There's a Korean cab driver. And he was driving. He kept looking at my husband. Look at my husband. He finally said, "Are you Marlon Brando?" And Daryl says, "Yeah, but I don't want people to know it, so don't tell anybody." And my sister and I said, "He's not. Daryl, you tell him the truth." He said, "Shut up, Jane. He's enjoying this, and so am I." And just kept driving, and she's good. He was something else. He was
Wow, it
really
sounds
adorable.
like he was incredible. Oh my gosh. But okay, you guys,
That's who he thought. That's who he thought he was. My God, he was quite certain he was my God.
now I see why you had that condition that led to your 4 children. So I see
Yeah, right.
you have Sarah, Brian, Mary, and Mark. How was your experience as a mom?
Harried and busy
Mhm.
and kind of organized insanity,
Yeah.
and feed them and clothe them and keep them clean and keep them alive and just get through the day, because he was gone all day from 7 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night because the store was open and he had to be there. He'd open it up and then he would be there until it was closing, and then he'd be there after it closed. And they didn't see their dad much until he changed jobs. But one time a man who was selling funeral plots came to the door, and the kids all ran to the door and they said, "Daddy's home, Daddy's home." And at that point, I decided we've lived in Waterloo, Iowa long enough. We're getting out of here. These kids think the salesman that comes to the door is their father. They didn't see him very often. It was quite interesting. We took them to see Misty of Chincoteague, a really good movie for kids. That's the first time they'd ever gone to the movie. And we never took them downtown. We never walked downtown, never went shopping, because Daryl brought home anything we needed. He would call and say, "If you want anything from the store, you call me and I'll bring it home." He was still doing that when he owned a grocery store in Osage, Iowa. And I said, "Daryl, I can come down to get it." He said, "Jane, you let me know what you want and I'll bring it home." Come to find out, he didn't want people to know he was married to me after we did the exercise.
Oh
And he
wow.
really didn't. He just, "Oh yeah, Jane, just stay out of the store. I can't afford to lose customers. I'll bring home what you want." And I thought, well, I'm not going to get angry about that, because this
Yeah.
is reality.
Yeah.
This is reality. If
How
people
did that make
knew
you feel
who he
though?
was
I
married
mean,
to,
personally.
well, once again, I'm one of those who can turn ugly things into something good. I
Yeah.
thought, well, if those people are that ignorant, take their money, Daryl.
Yeah.
If they're
Yeah.
that ignorant, yeah,
Right.
if they're that ignorant, let them pay for it. And
Absolutely.
that's what they did. He didn't cheat them, but hey, why would you give people who you don't want to see your wife because how she feels about racism, why would you want to give them a whole lot of big bargains? Get real.
Wow.
People, you live with the consequences of your behavior. And that's what's going to happen in this country very shortly now. We're
Sure.
going to be paid rather badly. What we're going to get we have sown the wind and we are going to reap the whirlwind if we do not stop this racist behavior
Absolutely.
today. And these young kids know it. Young kids know it, and they aren't going to put up with it. And I don't just mean children who are of a color other than the white color group. And there is no white color group. They're just the faded group.
Sure.
Native Americans, when we got here, the First Nations people called us pale faces, and that's what we are. But if we trace our DNA back far enough, we will find some DNA. Every single human being on the face of the earth will find some DNA from a country in Africa, because we are all descendants of those first modern human beings who evolved from 300 to 500,000 years ago, and they evolved in Africa. So get over it. You and I are cousins. 30th,
Oh,
50th
I told you.
cousins.
I
And
told
you
you
don't
from the
like
start.
having me for a cousin?
We're family
Yeah.
now.
That we have been forever. We've always been family.
Yes.
But we weren't allowed to recognize one another as family. Anyway, did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. But it actually brought up another question. How was it for Daryl with you doing these experiments, and how was his experience with racism or his outlook
Number
about racism?
one, we've got to quit calling this an experiment.
Sure.
Because what I do is I do in a boardroom, a classroom, a hall, what we do in this society every day. I separate people according to on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they have absolutely no control. I assign positive traits to them because of that physical characteristic. I assign negative traits to them if they don't have that characteristic. This is exactly how racism works.
Right.
You pick out a physical characteristic that you have decided you're going to use as your justification for abusing people. And then you teach people that you're right about them by treating the ones you've chosen as right well, and praising them to the skies and giving them more freedoms than anybody else has, at the same time that you are abusing the people who have the wrong color, skin, or eyes. What I did in that exercise, if what I did in that exercise was an experiment, then what we have been doing in this country for the last 500 years is an experiment, and we ought to put a stop to it. Now
Sure.
somebody's going to say, we haven't been here for 500 years. Yes, we have. Columbus came here in 1492, and it was at that time that the idea of several different races began. Before that, people were just different people, just colored, but they weren't different races. But then along comes, what's his name, doesn't matter, Torquemada, and the Spanish Inquisition, and he was going to Christianize everybody. So, but he killed everybody he thought wasn't Christian. Well, he found out after he had killed many people that many of those people he had killed were actually Christians, and he realized you can't identify a person's religion by looking at them. So he had to find a way to identify the people he could justly kill, and he set upon skin color. Now, this has only been around since the 15th and 16th century. People who are today using 15th and 16th century ideas and vocabulary should also then use 15th and 16th century communication and transportation things. You should, if you're going to be a racist, then give up everything that people of color have made available for you. Never again stop at a stoplight, because the first stoplight was invented by a black man. Never again put on a pair of shoes that you bought downtown, because the last for sewing shoes together was invented by a black man. Never again take a blood transfusion using stored plasma, because that process was developed by a black man. Never again eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, because people of color had bread before they had faded into whiteness, and peanut butter was developed by a black man. So you see, if we're going to be racist, let's be really good at it and give up everything that people of color have made available for us less colorful people. And if we teach
especially
those
since
things,
our brains are smaller.
well, number one, there's no proof that your brain is smaller than mine. And furthermore, I know mice that know more than rats do. So let's think about this. A hummingbird knows more than a horse. If you really want to. You see, this whole thing is so ridiculous and so man-made. I wear a shirt sometimes that says, God created the human race. One race, the human race. Human beings created racism. Now, anything you create, you can destroy. And if we wanted to destroy racism, we could destroy racism in 2 generations, simply by changing the way, number one, we have to re-educate our educators so they know what they should be doing with education, and then those educators have to educate their students in the truth. It says in the Bible, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. It also says in the Bible that we good Christians quote all the time to justify the silly things we do. It says that Jesus had woolly hair and feet of bronze. You don't often see a picture of Jesus in a Christian church with woolly hair and feet of bronze. He's got to be white in order for us to feel comfortable relating to him. It's hard to pray to somebody who has woolly hair and feet of bronze. So we just fixed it so he's something that we can relate to. Absolutely. This is not true religion. This is just the rightness of whiteness.
And you're absolutely right. As I know, my husband and I were, we grew up, of course, watching Good Times. And there was a specific episode of Good Times where Florida was looking at the black Jesus that JJ put on the wall, and she told him to take it down because the Jesus that they know and love was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus.
Right. And now there's a person going around the country saying Jesus was actually an Ethiopian Jew. People in Ethiopia were very, very dark brown. So it's time to get rid of this nonsense. It's time to start dealing with the truth instead of what we call a myth. But this isn't a myth. This is a lie. There are several books out there entitled The Myth of Race. This isn't a myth. A myth is something you make up to explain to us a natural phenomenon that we don't understand. So we just make up a myth. A lie is something we make up to justify our ugly behavior.
That's definitely a good way to look at it, and actually kind of segues us into talking about your career as a teacher. Can you tell me, your profession was a school teacher. What did you enjoy most about teaching?
Well, number one, I was never a teacher. And a school teacher is somebody who teaches the school.
Okay.
Yeah, see, our language is larded with really ridiculous statements. I don't experiment with children. If what I do when I separate them according to the color of their eyes is an experiment, then what we have been doing in this country for over 300 years is an experiment. It is illegal and unethical to experiment with people without their knowledge or without their permission. What I do is not an experiment. It's an exercise in discrimination based on the same chemical that causes skin color, which is melanin. If you have a lot of melanin in your eyes, like you have very dark brown eyes. If you have only a little melanin in your eyes, you have eyes like mine, blue or light blue. Or if you're albino, your eyes are pink. So if it's fair to judge people by the color of their skin, it's equally fair to judge them by the color of their eyes. Now, what was your question? Sorry about that.
No. This is good. I actually like the way you put it, when you broke down what educator was. Can you give me that breakdown again of what that word is?
That's the reason I say that I'm not. That's the reason I say I'm not a teacher. Teachers bring in facts and figures and train children in how to behave and how to learn. An educator is the word educator comes from the root duck deuce, which means lead. That's the root word, a duck deuce, which means lead. The prefix e, which means out. The suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is a person who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And you cannot lead people out of ignorance if you're teaching that Columbus discovered America. And you cannot lead people out of ignorance if you are still using the Mercator map of the world. Now get a picture in your mind of what the map of the world looks like. Do you see Greenland hanging down there in the middle of that map like a great big ripe plum? Here's Greenland. Here's this great big place up here. Now, I want everybody to start seeing the world this way.
Mm-hmm.
You see Greenland in this map? Clear up here. See that little tiny thing that's Greenland? And look at South America. This is one of the ways we use, the Mercator map is one of the ways we use to absolutely nail down the idea of the rightness of whiteness.
Yes.
We don't even realize, because we didn't learn, that the Pope commissioned Mercator to make a map that showed the spread of Christianity. So on the Mercator map, which we've been using since the 1600s, the countries where white people live are bigger than the countries where people of other color groups live. And on that map, instead of the equator being across the middle of the map, halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole, it's 2/3 of the way down the map. So that the countries in the northern hemisphere are bigger and the countries in the southern hemisphere are smaller. But if you're going to use the Mercator map, you can't use the word hemisphere, because hemi is a prefix that means half a sphere. But the Mercator map shows the northern hemisphere twice as large as the southern hemisphere. So you can't use that map if you're going to learn about hemispheres. And at the bottom of the Mercator map, on most maps, at the bottom of the map, in the legend, the last sentence in that legend is, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. Now, that's not the way the Mercator map is made.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, this is what people say to me, we don't teach racism in the schools in this country. We used to do that, but we don't anymore. And I'm thinking, oh, cut the duck up. We still do. I didn't say what you were thinking. I said cut the duck up, but you know what I'm thinking.
I'm with you.
If we're still using the Mercator map, we are teaching racism. The Boston Public Schools put this map, the Peters projection map, in their classrooms last year because they saw me describe it on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And so when I go to a college and go today, I take a whole mess of these with me, and I talk about the map, and then I hand these out to the kids in the crowd. And every one of them just grabs that map and they just commence to learn while they're sitting there. Geez, Elliot, I didn't know this, And I'm thinking, you didn't know this because you're getting educated. But you aren't getting educated. You're getting trained by teachers instead of being educated by educators. In this country, we talk about education in the schools. That's not what we offer. We offer indoctrination in the schools. We indoctrinate people so that they will be good United States of American citizens. And here's something else. This is something really gets my grind. You see, all these people from here to here are in America.
Mm-hmm.
Either North America, Central America, Latin America, South America. All of these people are Americans. And every time our president says, God bless you and God bless America, does he mean everybody from here to here? Because if he does, he's treating those South and Central Americans very strangely. If that's the kind of love he has for them, that he'll build a wall along the southern border of the United States to keep people who aren't Americans out.
Right.
All those people that these people that he's engaging are Americans.
That's right.
Give it up. Now, we should
very
this country
heartbreaking. Oh yeah, it's heartbreaking to say the least.
We must go ahead. What did you say?
Well, what I was going to say was, when it was a few years back, my husband and I actually watched one of your documentaries or one of your interviews where you were talking about the map, and it took me back to when I was a kid and how I learned when I was in school. And you're absolutely right in terms of indoctrination. It took me to go to college to learn a lot about Black history, to really learn a lot about who we are as a people. I went to private schools up to what I think like 6th or 7th grade, but didn't really learn anything. And it took me becoming an adult, and with my husband being in the military and us being able to travel the world and just learn a lot more about the world than just the bubble that we were in, and watching a lot of what you've talked about over the years, it was just like an eye opener. It was like, wow. And it made so much more sense.
They've done studies in this country that the longer you stay in school, the more bigoted you become. Because every year in school after kindergarten, you are reinforced in what you learned in kindergarten up to the 8th grade. And in high school, reinforces what you learned K through 8. And then college reinforces what you learned from grade 12 to 16 and 16 to 20. We do not change the education. We simply expound on it. We expand our lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, the big difference for me was going to an HBCU, historically Black college. Right. I went to Xavier University in New Orleans. Right. And when I tell you, I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say about HBCUs, and I'm just really proud, even as a mom, that my girls will be going to Fisk University. Going to an HBCU was such an eye opener for me. I was really embarrassed with how much I didn't know. I was embarrassed to say that money was spent for me to go to private schools for the better part of my early education. I knew nothing.
But you still learned the same nonsense in private school that you learned in the historically Black colleges. No, before you get to the historical Black college. If you had gone, you see, if you refuse to go along with what we teach in the school, you get abused verbally, physically, psychologically. People wonder why young Black males drop out of school, because they get tired of that crap.
Yeah.
And they don't have to put up with it anymore. And they can get out on the street and make a whole lot of money doing something, whether or not it's legal, but they can make their living and they don't have to listen to that nonsense. If we want to keep these young men in school, we'd better change the curriculum. And we'd better have every prospective educator read the book, Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. Have you read that book?
Yeah, it was actually one of my textbooks at Xavier University.
Oh, I just think that's one of the most remarkable books I have ever read. Every prospective educator should have to read that book, and then they would say to themselves, 20 days, Negro History Month, 20 days, we're going to learn about something that started 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ.
Right.
This isn't black history. We start with slavery to learn about black history. As if that's where blacks started, when we discovered them and brought them to the proper countries, to civilize them. All those words are part of the vocabulary of the 15th and 16th century. Now, if you're going to live like the 15th and 16th century, in your vocabulary and your history, then you have to live like they lived in the 15th and 16th century. Give up electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Give up central heating. Give up central air. Give up clocks. Give up when men have to wear knee breeches and buckles on their shoes and powdered wigs. And when women have to wear pantalettes and pantaloons. If you're going to live, if you're going to spout that 15th and 16th century nonsense, then you better go back to living like that. And they're going to find it very difficult to support those ideas when they can't put them out on the television.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I tell you what, that actually kind of, segues us into my next question, was how did the development of the blue eyes and brown eyes test come about? Because I know at that time you were educating third graders. So can you tell us how that study came about?
A friend of mine, the day after we finished the exercise that first time, my kids wrote 4-paragraph compositions. The first one was to tell how it felt, how it felt to be brown-eyed or blue-eyed, how it felt to be the other color, how it felt on the day they were on the bottom, how it felt the day they were on the top, what discrimination is, and who Martin Luther King Jr. was. I read those, and it was like a college education there before me. This is what those kids learned. It was simply fantastic. So I showed them to a friend of mine, Charlotte Button. She took those letters, and also, they also sent letters to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife to tell her how sorry they were. She read those letters, and she sent those essays, either the letters or the essays, to the Johnny Carson show. So over the intercom one day comes an announcement. Mrs. Elliott, you're wanted in the principal's office. You have a telephone call. So I went down to the telephone. I said, you kids take care of yourselves. I'll be back in a minute. I went down, and here's Johnny Carson on the telephone. And the kid said, let us know who it is. Let us know who it is. And I said, I'll tell you. Don't worry about it. I'll be back. So I turned on the intercom and said, kids, it's Johnny Carson. And they said, who's Johnny Carson? Yes! I was so pleased. And they said, oh, we thought it'd be Mrs. King. They wanted it to be Mrs. King. It was just fantastic. And he heard that on the telephone. I thought, ooh, that's lonely. So he asked me if I'd come in and do the Johnny Carson show. That was 52 years ago.
Wow.
Last week, 52 years later, I did the Johnny Carson show, only who's on it now?
Jimmy Fallon.
The Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon. 52 years after that first appearance on the Johnny Carson show, I did the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And he said, wow, and here you're back. I said, yeah, what happened in the interim? And he looked at me like, you're some kind of a nut. We're not going to discuss that. And I said, right, Jimmy, baby, you don't want to discuss that. Because here we are right back to where we started.
Wow.
We are doing the same things now that we did in 1968. We haven't learned one damn thing.
Wow. That has to be surreal when you think about being there with Johnny Carson 52 years ago, and then fast forward today, 52 years later, with basically the whole world just completely falling to shambles. Wow.
We're all right back. And the reason we're doing that is colorless people in this country, 30% of them, are really angry that there was a black man in the White House for 8 years. Mm-hmm. So they maintained a low profile for those 8 years, telling one another, yeah, we're going to get him. Mitch McConnell said he's never going to get elected. Then after he got elected, he said he's never going to be successful. Then when he ran, he's not going to get elected again. He did. He's never going to be. So he spent those 8 years keeping good things from happening as much as he could. He couldn't do all of it because Barack Obama kept on doing things and signing executive orders in spite of that fool, Mitch McConnell. So then in comes Mitch, and in comes Trump. And here we have, if that isn't a really scary pair, I don't know what you think is. But this is what we're seeing now. The kinds of legislation that the kinds of things he wrote, his executive orders, they are absolutely a reaction to having Barack Obama in the White House. And he is reacting that strongly to Barack Obama because Barack Obama made fun of him at a press dinner one night.
Yeah.
And he has never recovered from it. He
Right.
gets even, but he is getting even with all of us. He is getting even to the detriment of the United States of America. And we all have to realize that that's the reason for what's going on. That and the fact that he is a blatant, avowed racist, sexist, ageist, homophobe, and ethnocentrist. I can't think of anything, one of those that he isn't.
Wow. Well, so with the blue eyes, brown eyes, with doing that, how was that for you, setting that up with kids so young? How was that?
I didn't set it up. It isn't difficult to set it up. All you have to do is copy what you see in society on a daily basis. And when I do that exercise with so-called adults, inside every adult is a child that's waiting to get out. And when I do the exercise with adults, I just put myself in my parent ego state, and that forces them into their child ego state, and they have no choice but to act the way those kids do. It is absolutely terrifying. The first time I did that exercise, I told my kids that blue-eyed people are as smart as brown-eyed people, they're as clean as brown-eyed people, they're as civilized as brown-eyed people. And little Debbie, sitting in the front row, looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, well, you little shit. How dare you talk to me that way? I'm the teacher here. And all of a sudden, I realized how it feels to be treated unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which you have no control. I thought I knew. I had no idea. You can talk about racism until hell freezes over, but until you've experienced it, you don't know what you're talking about. And at that point, the brown-eyed kid spoke up and said, well, she's just because it doesn't matter that she's got blue eyes, the principal and the superintendent are both brown-eyed, and they all agreed, yeah, the principal and the superintendent were both blue-eyed. So I'm all right. She's probably, and they said, George Washington was blue-eyed. Okay, anything. I'll take it, kids, anything. The weakest positive was happy for me. It was an awful day. It was awful.
Wow.
I watched my loving, and accepting and Christian, I mean, really good kids become, in the space of 15 minutes, what I was sworn they would never be. I watched those brown-eyed kids physically abused, emotionally abused, mentally abused, verbally abused their blue-eyed peers who had been their best friend the day before. And at lunchtime, I went down to the teacher's lounge to share what was going on with the other 2 third-grade teachers. I needed some support. I should have known better. I walked into the teacher's lounge, and there were about 10 teachers in there, and I told them what I was doing with my students. And when I finished telling them, there were 3 third grades at that time. The younger of the other 2 third-grade teachers, who was about probably 52, 54, said, I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, arithmetic yet. She should have done the extra stuff. The other one said, and she was about 62 years old, had been molding young minds for over 30 years. And she said the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch.
Wow.
And nobody frowned. And nobody said, Helen, judge not that ye be not judged. And nobody said, insomuch if you have done it unto one of these, my children, so have you done it unto me. Not one of them complained about what she said. Not one of them confronted her. Every one of those teachers, because they're teachers, smiled or laughed and nodded because she had expressed their feelings perfectly, and she had the most right to do so. I went back to my classroom determined that no child of any age will ever leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged.
Wow.
I may not be able to change your attitude, but I will challenge your attitude, and you have to prove to me that colorless people are better than people with a lot of color, and you can't do it because it isn't true.
That's right. That's right.
I won't tolerate it.
So can you tell me about your experience in Union City? Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's the third year I did the exercise. The people in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, the school department called and asked me if I would do the exercise, if I would come and talk to their teachers and do the exercise. So like a fool I did. And I think there were probably 400 teachers in the room, and I put them through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, and they went nuts. And in the afternoon, that was in the morning, they didn't have a good morning. In the afternoon, two black men, put me in the car and took me to lunch. And they made me sit with my back to the windows, which I never do, because I'd already been threatened with death several times. And they sat facing the windows looking like this all the time we were eating. Then they put me back in the car and took me back to the hotel for the afternoon. And the one man got out of the car with me. He said, "Now I'm going to stay with you this afternoon so that you won't be alone." I said, "Huh?" He said, "You need to rest. I'll stay with you. You don't have to worry about it. You're not going to be alone this time." Look, he said, "I'm not leaving." So I sat and talked to this young black male all afternoon, and then in the evening we ate dinner in the same way, and then we went out and did a program in the evening. And the next morning they picked me up, same thing, and went to a school and worked. And then that night I was supposed to stay overnight in Uniontown and go to Harrisburg the next day to work with Anna S. Cunningham, who was the head of the Civil Rights Division. And they said, "Miss Elliott, we're going home. We're going to take you to Harrisburg tonight." I said, "I'm supposed to work. We're taking you to Harrisburg tonight." And I don't have time for the whole thing. It was just absolutely amazing. And the three carloads of black, two in back and one in front, accompanied Anna S. Cunningham and me to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They went as fast as they dared to go. We got to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and they turned around and went back. And I said to her, "Look, what's going on here?" She said, "After you spoke yesterday morning, the teachers called the superintendent and said, if you don't get that bitch out of town, we're going to shoot her." Wow. She said, "We don't want to see you shot in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. We're getting you out of town tonight." So we went to Harrisburg, and the next morning I got up and did a program in Harrisburg. And then that afternoon, Anna S. Cunningham went back to her home or her office or something and left me in a motel in Harrisburg. And I woke up the next morning, and I got all ready to go, and I had my neat little luggage cart in my hand and my purse over my shoulder. I opened the door, and I looked out, and here I'm in a four-sided building in the court, and it's 2 stories. And I looked up, in every one of those rooms up there were large glass windows and doors. Mm-hmm. And I thought, behind one of those windows could be the person who was sent here to shoot me. And I backed up, I pushed my luggage cart back behind me, and I closed the door, and I stood there. I remember saying to myself, now you got a choice to make, Jane. You can either walk out that door and take your chances on being killed and never see your kids or your husband again, or you can stand here and be terrified and never do this work again. Be terrified with fear, be paralyzed with fear. What are you going to do? I wanted to go home. So I stiffened my shoulders. I guess I thought if my muscles were stiff enough, the bullets would bounce off. You do strange things when you're scared. And I walked quickly. I didn't run, because I think you run because you're scared. You don't run because you're scared. You're scared because you run. Once you start to run, the adrenaline starts to flow, and you've made yourself a problem. And I thought, they're not going to see that I'm scared. They're not going to see me crying. They're not going to see me scared. And I stiffened my shoulders, and I walked very determinedly to the desk to sign out. And I got there, and I thought, well, look what you've done, you damn dummy. You allowed them to scare you nearly to death. And at that point, I decided I will never be scared again. You can kill me, but you can't kill the idea of one race. You cannot stop it. Who was it said, no power on earth can stop a man with a dream or an idea whose time has come. Mm-hmm. No power on earth was able to stop Martin Luther King's dream. That's it right. Is more alive today than it was when he was living. And no power on earth is going to stop the idea of one race. It's an idea whose time has come. And now, when people threaten to kill me, I say to them, go for it, fool. And when I go to a college campus, I look down, and there are always 3 of those little boys with those red hats on, caps on, that say, make America great again. What they mean is, make America hate again. because Ronald Reagan wanted to take us back to the 50s, which were really good for white males and weren't worth a damn for the rest of us. So that's what that cap is all about. And I look at those three boys, and I'm doing my thing, and I say, wait a minute, look, fellas, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're talking about. You want to see me dead because of what I do to decrease the level of racism in this country. You can kill me, fine, that's go for it. But you need to know that if you do, you might make a martyr out of me, and then you might have to spend the rest of your life celebrating Jane Elliott Day once a year. Now, do you want to do that? And they'll go, no. I say, fine, good thinking. I know you don't. Now, keep me alive on your campus. Furthermore, shut up and listen while I'm talking. And they just shut up like, oh, she's not scared. I'm not scared. I lost my husband almost 7 years ago. I lost my oldest son 2 years ago. Death. I am not afraid of death. Mm-hmm. I'm more concerned about living a meaningful life.
Wow.
Everybody dies, but not everybody does something that could change the way other people feel about one another or about the way they feel about themselves. So, yes. Sure, go ahead and kill me if you want to, but then you'll be driving down streets that are Jane Elliott Avenue. Do you really think you want to do that? You want me to live forever, you little idiots? Because if you do, you can do that, and it'll only take one shell. But you better shoot straight, and some of you can't. So I don't worry. My kids, my remaining 3 children, say, Mom, don't say that anymore. And I say, no, you have to know, kids. I know you feel bad when you think I'm going to be dead, but they don't always. Sometimes they think, well, if she'd go now, we'd get more money. Don't want to spend it all. But I don't have that much, but, a little is better than none. But that makes them sad. But they don't realize that if this video, or whatever you're going to do with this, if the book that I wrote called A Collar in My Pocket, if the books that have been written about me keep on being read, then the fact that I'm dead won't matter at all, because that idea will still be out there.
That's right.
Martin Luther King Jr. may be dead, but he taught us about hope. He wanted us to have hope. And for me, hope is an acronym for holding on to positive energy. And that's what I'll do. And if they think it's positive to shoot me, they have to know that I'm not concerned about it, fellas. Give it up. Okay.
That's a really powerful, very powerful attitude to have, especially given your experience and even just what you've undertaken. I hear you talk about your kids. It makes me wonder, how was that experience for them when you were?
Terrible.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. They were abused by their peers, by their teachers, and by the parents of some of the parents of their peers, because they had, but to this day, and 20% of the people in Riceville call me the town's only N-word lover. And I say to them, fine, call me a lover. It's better than being called a hater any day. And call me a lover. If that's what you want to call me, good. That's positive as far as I'm concerned. If I die for what I do to lessen the degree of hatred based on ignorance of race, then hey, that's worth dying for. I don't want to die for it. I'd rather live to tell about it. But if I can't, so be it. Somebody else is going to take it up. A whole bunch of people say to me, will you train me to do what you do? And I say to them, you don't need training. All you have to do is just act white. All you have to do what I do is act white.
Wow.
And that's scary, isn't it? But
Wow.
Every white person knows how to act white, but they won't admit it. They have to be trained. And I say, no, you don't have to be trained. And I've tried to train several. I had 10 women here several years ago, training them to do the exercise. And except for one of them, they said, I can't do this. I'm not mean enough. I can't be as mean as you are, Jane. Well, people who are allowing the networks to show that picture of that young man being murdered, and of that police officer holding him down until he was dead, are doing something worse than what I do. Yeah. Because black children, black boys are seeing that, and their mothers are seeing that. Yes. And they shouldn't have to be intimidated by what that policeman proved that he could do to a young, tall, black male.
Yes, ma'am.
Publicly.
Yes.
You don't even have to do it in the dark anymore. You don't have to go into a dark alley to do it. You can do it right there on the street with people standing around watching you do it.
Yes.
And 3 cops held him down while the other one choked him to death.
Yes. Yes.
You want to talk about mean? Somebody should tell the people who are running the networks, stop
Yes.
showing it. All you
Oh,
have to do is
I
say,
could not agree
listen,
more. Because as a mom of a young Black boy, 15 years old, I have several nephews. I have a husband. I have, friends. I have, that I can't look at it anymore. I
you
cannot.
have, you have, you have members of an endangered species is what you have.
Yeah.
That's what you have. That you have children, relatives, friends, and family members who now know that you don't have to act out. You don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to be stealing something. You don't have to be murdering someone. All you have to have is have the wrong color skin with the right colored cops,
Yes.
and you are not safe. These people are supposed to protect and defend us. Instead, they are charged with taking out a number of those who are other than pale-faced.
And can you imagine what that does to the psyche just of people of color? It actually, when watching that, it actually brought to mind thinking about the doll test that was done with Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark.
Kenneth Clark.
Yes.
Yep, yep.
And the
And
reason why,
in the book, A Class Divided, which was written by William Peters, because he made the film in my classroom, he interviewed Kenneth Clark. He wrote the preface to the book, A Class Divided, and he says, if educators were required to do the exercise that Jane Elliott did, we could change the level of racism in this country. That's what it is. And I have had people go through that exercise and come out crying and saying, I didn't know, God help me, I didn't know. Did I tell you about my father?
yeah,
I told you about my father. When he saw the film, the Canadian film, and I showed it to my father. Did I tell you that? Yeah, well.
no, you
my
didn't.
father never forgot it. Oh, well, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation sent a film crew to my classroom to film the exercise the second year that we did it. And they filmed in my classroom for 3 days, took that film to Toronto, cut it down to half an hour, and sent me a copy of it. So I took it up to the hotel that my folks lived in and showed it to them, my mother and my father. And after it was done, my father, and I had never seen him cry since my little sister died when I was 10 and she was 3, and she was his favorite child. And he absolutely adored that child. And after he saw that film, he stood up and he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls. He was a farmer. And he wiped his eyes and he blew his nose. And he said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Now, if somebody had taught him that when he was 9 years old, it would have changed 50 years of his life. He wouldn't have had to live 50 years of feeling guilty about the way he said one thing and did another, depending on who he was with. He wouldn't have had to do that. He could have lived the truth all his life.
Yeah.
If he had
How did it
known
affect
that,
your mother?
after my father died, she kicked me out of the family.
Wow.
Because she said, nobody's comfortable when you're around. Don't come over here anymore. You have nobody's comfortable. And she was right. Nobody was. Because they tried saying, I don't want her. You can have her. She's too fat for me. And I'd say, wait a minute. Do you know what you're doing? And my nieces would, when my brother would start to play the banjo and sing that, when they'd say, I don't want him. You can have him. He's too thin for me. He's too short for me. He's too dumb for me. And so he stopped playing that. We stopped singing that song. We stopped. I can't tolerate intolerance anymore.
Sure. Wow.
I'm intolerant of intolerance. I can't do it. I won't do it. And
Wow.
I think I disapprove of people burning buildings and breaking things. But how many black churches have been burned in the South in this country?
Yes.
How many black boys have lost their lives? How many black mothers have lost their children? How many black women have lost their mates? We burn people.
Mm-hmm.
The Life magazine did, 50th year thing, a book that compiled a whole lot of magazines that showed a whole lot of things over the last, I think it was 20 years, 50 years of life. And one of the major pages in that was a picture of that young man hanging from a tree, the young man who said something to a white woman, and they went to his home and dragged him out of his home, beat him senseless, cut him, hung him from a tree. And Life magazine had a picture of him, Emmett Till, a picture of him hanging from a tree with all these white people looking at him like this, with that, look what we got ours, hanging from a tree, for God's sake. And that was one of the things they put in a full-page spread in the Life magazine. And several other pictures about how awful, what happened to black people. That said to people who read that magazine, see, we've done it before, we can do it again. And the back cover of that magazine is an older white man shaking hands with or patting a younger white man to let him know something about the ad that was being run. But what it said to me, reading that magazine, was, we did it. We've taken care of it now. We did it just right. That should never have been published in that way. But then, on the other hand, there is such a thing as responsible publishing.
Sure.
Look at this. These are twin girls. Twin girls. Everybody has to read the April 2018 issue of the National Geographic magazine, because in it you see about 70 people of different colors on 3 pages, and you also see where people started, where human beings started, and how they traveled from there to populate every landmass on the face of the earth.
Wow.
That's what African Americans did for us.
Yeah.
That's what African Americans, those are your forebears. Those are my forebears. In my DNA runs DNA from those African Americans. So when I do this work, I don't do it for them. I do it for us.
Yes.
This is all about us.
Yes.
It isn't about them and us. It's about us.
Absolutely.
We can save the world if we stop trying to destroy one another.
Absolutely. And us is the operative word. And I share with family and I share with friends sometimes, even admitting just my own struggles, with racism and my own, doing my own introspection and really checking myself, even with my own mindset, and being able to look at someone that doesn't look like me and still be able to call them my sister or call them my brother. That's a challenge to myself.
More than that, we could call them our husband or our wife, because you need to realize that those miscegenation laws that were controlling our lives for so many years, you need to realize that you can't cross a cat with a dog and get a dad or a call, because they are different species.
Right.
But members of different color groups can mate, unite, and give birth to beautiful, bright, happy, acceptable, wonderful children. We do it all the time because they are members of the same species.
Absolutely.
We human beings are all members of the same species. How long will it take? We haven't learned that. We don't teach that.
Absolutely.
We teach that don't bring home a black kid to my house. And when I was a kid, a teenager, my dad said, I don't want any pickaninnies in my grandchildren. And then my daughter married a Saudi Arabian. And we brought Sophie home. She brought Sophie home. And we took her over to my father's house. And we put her, he was sitting in a rocking chair, and in his billow broth, and we put her in his arms. And he looked up and he said, she's the most beautiful child I've ever seen.
Wow.
And he looked at Wahab and Sarah standing there together, and he said, it's a good cross. That's a good cross. Because he's a farmer. And he knows a good cross when he says, that's a good cross. And it was. It was a wonderful cross. And those 2 girls that they have are one of the loves of my life. I absolutely adore them.
Wow.
And I admire them because they've got the last name Salama. And they aren't as lily white as they should be if they're going to be accepted. But they're sharper than a tack. And they can do anything. They can do anything because they have listened to the crap and listened to their mother say, ignore it. Or their grandfather say, just keep smiling and they'll wonder what you're up to.
That's right.
So that's what they do, and it washes off them like water off a duck's back.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I look at my own kids, And my own kids are all different colors. And I can remember when we were living in Japan, and they were at the time, I think they were maybe 1 and 2, and I had them on the playground. And I remember a lady walked up to me because she heard one of them say "mommy," and she looked at me and she looked at them because they were extremely fair skinned. And she looked at me and she said, "Are those your kids?" And I said, "Yes, they are." She's like, "But they're so fair." And I looked at her in my flippantness and I said, "Oh no, I'm just their mammy." And I walked
Yeah,
off. But it goes to
yeah,
show you the level of ignorance and the things that we experience. I mean, I have 4 kids now, and with my youngest, and that was why I brought up the idea about the doll test, because I remember when my baby girl Sydney, she was about 5 years old, and as a mom, brought her all the Disney stuff and the Snow White and the Cinderella, and thinking, oh, it's a great thing. My child came to me and told me that she wanted to be pretty like that, referencing
right,
Cinderella and Snow White. And I looked at her, I
right.
said, well, no. I said, you're just as pretty as they are. She was like, no, she said, but I'm not white. And
Sure.
I mean, I'm scratching my head because
Well,
I know what we
you
teach
have to,
our children. We reaffirm them all the time, but still, somewhere she got along the way that she was less than. And from that moment forward, I completely stopped purchasing the Disney stuff. And what I started doing, it took about maybe over a period of 5 years. Almost every night, we did a chocolate princess story where I made her the princess of the story.
uh-huh.
And I would
Good for
show
you.
her pictures of, I mean, women that were just like jet black women that were gorgeous.
Right.
And I would show her
Yeah.
those pictures and I would ask her, is she beautiful? She said, well, yes, ma'am. I said, well, is she beautiful? Yes, ma'am. Then I show her in the mirror. I said, well, then is she beautiful? And before long, now you can't tell her she's not cute now, thank the Lord. So obviously it worked. But as a mom, that was heartbreaking for my child to think that she's less than, and to even know that I played a part in it unwittingly, not even knowing with the things that I was buying that were considered to be beautiful and that personified beauty in a way to make her think that she was less than or not enough.
That's what television tells
Yeah.
her. That's what books
Yes.
tell her. That's what magazines tell her until you get to National Geographic, and then
Yeah.
it's a different thing. That's what the encyclopedia tells her. But
Yeah.
now you need to, how old are your kids now?
My oldest, she'll be 20 this year. I have a daughter who just turned 18. My son is 15, and my baby girl, she's 12. She'll be 13 in a few months.
You need to get the encyclopedia that you see back there on the shelf. It's
Yes.
Joy Hakim's A History of Us, and it tells the history of this country in a real way
Yeah.
about people of different colors. It is just fascinating. Every kid should get to see it, and every kid should get to see this magazine because it just opens. It says, "Here's the way it is."
Yeah.
We're not going to argue about this. These are facts. What you've been told is fiction. Now we're going to deal with facts, and that will drive white folks crazy.
Absolutely.
That will drive faded people crazy. And you have to tell your daughter there are kids in this country
Yeah.
that try to bleach their skin
I know.
so that they can get right. You have to tell them, wait a minute. Those folks are faded. You aren't faded. They're faded. And as the ozone layer gets the bigger and bigger hole in the ozone layer, more and more sunlight is going to enter our environment, and we are going to be exposed to more and more sunlight. And if you
Yeah.
don't have a chemical in your skin that protects your cells from the damaging rays of the sun, you will develop melanoma. And that melanoma won't stay on your skin. It will go various places in you, and you will die of cancer if you don't stay out of the sun. And I've heard black mothers say to their daughters, stay out of the sun, you're black enough. And then they both laugh because they know that the more they stay in the sun, the more black they'll get. But the longer my daughter-in-law stays in the sun with her red hair and her very pale skin, she has a new melanoma every 3 or 4 months. She's
Wow.
going in to get melanoma removed from her skin. Eventually, it'll go so deep that they won't be able to get it, and she will
Wow.
have more than just skin cancer. So skin surface cancer. So you need to realize that those people who don't want children to marry members of other color groups. The day will come in this country when fair-skinned people will be saying to their kids, marry black. I want my grandchildren to live a long time. You find someone of color to marry so that they will have good colorful skin. Pale skin right now is a real disadvantage.
Yeah.
And pale folks don't realize that. They have no idea what's coming. Some of them do, and they're scared to death because they're afraid that people of color, when they get power, are going to treat us the way we have treated them.